Hi there, my name's Nick Francis. I'm the Chief Technology and Marketing Officer for Brooklyn Vendor Assurance, and I'm also a Vendor Ops Advisor. I want to talk to you today about refreshing or potentially writing from scratch your supplier management strategy or your vendor management strategy, and why I think there's 6 key reasons why now is the right time to do that. First one is speed. So over the last sort of decade, everything's got faster and quicker and more automated, and we're in this sort of unprecedented period of change. What that's meant in terms of this digital uprising is now that you've got traditional services that were normally done within the 4 walls of a large company now are being broken down on a daily, weekly and monthly basis, and more little services are being stood up outside, and some of those consolidated into larger services and sent outside the 4 walls. So there's more suppliers and more vendors being used on a daily basis than ever before. So what that's needing is you've either got this sprawl of increasing numbers that you need to manage, but also then potentially looking for chances to consolidate, so continual consolidation. Which vendors are working best for us? What can they offer us? Is there a multi-play that they can offer a lot of things under one roof, and consolidating that together, looking for operational efficiencies, not just from a cost consolidation perspective, but also operational complexity perspective. More moving parts, more complexity, more things to manage, more things that can go wrong and thus impact your company, which then also leads on to sort of cost containment, containing of cost, making sure it doesn't get too big, make sure you're still operationally efficient, which should be front and centre. And I know in recent studies that is at the top of a chief procurement officer's mind as to how to deal with that. Number 2, the global supply chain. Its resiliency has been tested recently, to say the least. Brexit in the UK, or UK coming out of Europe, was sort of 2016, and we've got 2018, 2019, the pandemic hitting in 2020, threw things all up in the air, and now we've got a situation where there's a conflict in Europe that is disrupting the global economy even more. And no doubt there will be other things that happen. Through that period as well, we've also seen regulations get much stronger. Financial services, as an example, 2017 saw the European Banking Authority drop a series of outsourcing regulations, and the PRA followed suit, announcing last year and then going live this year on the 31st of March, their versions of those outsourcing regulations and how you need to manage them. And there's some 15 odd processes in there that dictate what you should be covering with these important outsourced vendors, which includes also intergroup as well. So where you are a big company and you are supplying yourself services across a boundary and across legal entities, you need to manage that in an outsourced way as well, in a compliant manner against all these new processes and policies. So that needs to be considered, and if your organisation hasn't considered that and how you manage your vendors, then great reason for this strategic discussion and this strategic approach to come out because of that. Number 3, increasing risk. I mentioned it earlier, I touched on it. The gig economy, greater levels of automation, greater levels of digitisation. It's meaning more suppliers are being used for more things. So whereas risk management's always been a bit tricky and tough to do inside of a large organisation, it's now a lot tougher because it's not just within the size of the 4 walls of your large organisation. You've then probably got to look at another large organisation and another large organisation chained on that, which is your supply chain, and getting aligned in terms of what the risk of what you're asking that organisation to do represents, and the controls that you need to put in place. All in all, lots of risks outside the 4 walls of your company, lots of controls to put in place, regular touch points, regular controls assessments, regular review of controls effectiveness. It's just more to manage and more to do if you're going to reduce your risks in the way that an organisation needs to, and the regulator in some cases expects you to. Number 4, you can get a lot of value from your suppliers, a lot of added value that a lot of people don't realise. So you can look at your suppliers and what they provide as products and services, right? And a lot of those organisations, to ensure that their products and services are received and utilised in the right manner and are effective, have to pseudo become specialists and SMEs within the discipline that uses those said products and services. So part of the cost of them doing business, as an example, is they have to know how to run these functions. They have to have really mapped out customer journeys and user journeys that and the processes designed and defined and the policies around the product and service that they provide. And you can get that within reason, all offer them for likelihood free because of the deal you've done with them. So when you do things like what I'm talking about now, putting a strategy in place around vendor management or supplier management, you've likely got a partner or a supplier somewhere that's giving you a product or service that probably has done all this hard thinking and has seen many organisations do it that they've sold into and can help you accelerate that view. I know we get asked to do that as a company, and I'm sure that you could do that elsewhere with your other products and services and get increased value out of your suppliers and what they represent to you. Fifth, and one of the biggest ones, and the most disrupting one we've seen of recent times, sustainability. It's always been on the rise for the last few years. It started off with an organisation having to be concerned and report on their own carbon footprint and what they're doing from a carbon offset perspective and how they're getting to carbon neutral. That agenda has taken a big leap up, what with COP26 and all the surrounding noise from governments around the globe. But now what you've got is the need to understand the part you play in your suppliers' carbon footprint and what their plans are to get into net neutral and how long and what they're using from a sustainable supply chain themselves and how they run that as a business. So that needs to be looked at and calculated, which again needs an approach, it needs a team, etc. Which leads me on to my final sixth point, is one of clarity and capability. Where the sands have shifted and these first 5 points I made have crystallised and come out of the woodwork over the last decade, it needs to get to a point now where, because there's increased regulation and increased focus, that everyone in an organisation that works with or alongside vendors and suppliers needs to be given clarity of that task. We've seen for a number of years now that although a lot of people work next to suppliers, they're not really given clarity around what supply management means or what they need to do for managing that supplier, what boxes they need to check from a policy and process perspective to ensure that they're compliant with policy. So they need to be given that clarity of task. And equally, when you define that clarity of task and through your strategic documentation, your strategic reports and your operating model, you need to then provide the capability alongside the clarity of task. So what I mean by that is if you give clarity of a task and it requires a certain amount of skill set, you need to make sure the individuals that are going to conduct that task have the right levels of capability and understanding of how to do it and the skills to match it to make sure it's done in the right manner. And along with that, there needs to be the right levels of data repository, so clarity of task, capability, and also right tooling and platform to hold the data in a structured manner that can be recalled for purposes in the future should we need to look back and look at anything from an audit perspective, and then the ability to then layer on that sort of digital orchestration, so digital workflow. If something's triggered, helping the task, so the clarity of the task, be brought forward and then help enhance the capability each time by what needs to be done at what particular step, just to ensure that the person can do it in the most efficient time possible. Because some of these processes and some of these tasks don't happen too frequently. Some of them are yearly and some of them are one-off, so you might not do them for months to the next. So you need some kind of digitised documentation to help you understand each time that task is deployed and how that is closed off effectively. Compounded on top of that, we're now in a situation where we have more people working remote than ever before. We have a lot more virtual interaction than there ever has been, a lot less face-to-face. We've been on this journey for more of a decade now where the technology's been good enough for people to literally work anytime, any place, anywhere. We were seeing organisations moving to a more of a digital footprint and having less real estate for their teams. The pandemic has just accelerated this. And I know we're finding as a business it's a lot more difficult to get people involved in the face-to-face events, etc. And we need to work out ways of doing hybrid events, hybrid management. A lot of our sales calls are happening in a remote situation now. And more often than ever before, we sometimes don't meet the customers in a physical sense anymore. It's all done digitally and transacted digitally, and then we deploy it digitally because the technology's there to do it and the mindset appears to have shifted. So you need, for supply management and the strategy you put in place for that, is to consider the new ways of working that we're seeing. That genie is not going back in its bottle, I fear. That's where we are, the reality of the situation. So those are the 6 things: speed, global supply chain impacts, increasing risk, how to get added value from your suppliers, sustainability and clarity and capability that I think are the reasons you really should be refreshing or creating a supply management or vendor management strategy. Hope that was useful. Thank you.
To keep up with the latest Brooklyn vendor assurance news, subscribe here and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Links in the description below.